Good afternoon. It's Sunday, the 26th of October. My name is Brian Liddy, and welcome to the Full Scottish. Today, we're joined by, well, before I tell you who we've got, I should apologise first of all for our extremely late start, and also, secondly, we're trying to overcome technical issues across international borders. We've got somebody trying to produce the programme from Germany, while I'm here in Scotland, and our guest, Huw Marshall, is in Wales. So I hope you can be patient with us. Good afternoon, Huw. How are you? And now we've lost Hugh's sound. What could that be? I wonder. Uh, I'm going to start with, I'll read out the Middle East update and we'll see what materialises. At least 68,519 Palestinians have been killed and 170,382 people have been wounded in Gaza since the 7th of October 2023. We were going to talk about the Knesset in Israel, which has been voting on annexing the West Bank, effectively imposing Israeli sovereignty on Palestine. Meanwhile, Palestinian women are forced to give birth in the rubble of Gaza. Huw, I see you listening, and my question to you was going to be, I don't know if you're going to be able to answer, I was going to ask, has the Israeli government and the Knesset got its priorities wrong? No, Huw, we still don't have your sound. The vote in the Knesset, it was a bill which passed by 25 votes to 24. So it only passed by one vote, or it won by one vote. This was despite opposition from the Prime Minister Netanyahu, who said it was an attempt by the opposition to sow discord. And it's the first of four votes that the bill will have to pass if it is to become law. Hugh's trying to reconnect, so I might have to go back over some of this, but I thought it was interesting to note that J.D. Vance, when he had been asked about the vote in the Knesset, he said it was weird. Hello, Huw, you're back. Can
You
you
know?
hear us? Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know what.
That's okay. It's good to have you. Thank you for your patience with us as well. So again, apologies if everybody in the studio here is a bit echoey. So as I was saying, the vote in the Knesset in Israel has been started its route through Parliament, through the Israeli Parliament, about annexing the West Bank. Has the Israeli government got its priorities wrong? Because when you look at the state of things in Gaza.
It's all a bit strange because it seems to have gone off the radar, hasn't it? You know what's actually happening in Israel following the ceasefire, which was welcome. But I think it's a dangerous time because obviously, if the world's eyes are off the Israeli government, then the likelihood is then they're going to try and do stuff that they shouldn't be doing.
I don't know if you were able to hear because you were logging back in, but I was quite surprised at how close the vote was, only 25 to 24. And I was surprised to see that Prime Minister Netanyahu had opposed it. I thought he would have been in favour of annexing Palestine. No?
Yeah, I would imagine it depends on what Trump is telling him what to do, isn't it? So I think that's the other thing is what was going on behind the scenes there. But what it shows as well is that there is a far right element of that government, and obviously I think they're scheduled for elections at some point quite soon. So I think it's going to be quite interesting how the dynamic changes after that.
So do you think Netanyahu has been brought to heel? Is going to start sort of uh, behaving?
Um, that's a difficult question, isn't it? Because he's always been a bit of a, a rogue figure who's just gone off and done his own thing. But it does seem with uh, the ceasefire that's come in that there is a potential, for influence on him. I would imagine his main priority now is trying to make sure that he gets a deal to make sure that he doesn't get imprisoned once he's in a position to be put in court.
Yeah, interesting. And then also this week, the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, advised Israel that it should raise restrictions on the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine, better known as UNRWA, and they should allow aid into Gaza to ensure food, water, medicine, and shelter for Palestinians. Meanwhile, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that UNRWA can have no future in Gaza. Will Israel take that to mean that it can go right ahead and ignore the ICJ and stop aid going into Gaza?
I think there's just too much pressure on them now because of what's going on to not allow aid into Gaza. I think what we're seeing now as well is we're seeing pictures of the utter devastation within Gaza. So I think, as more pictures come out of Gaza, I think the position for Israel, claiming that it wasn't a genocide and there isn't any famine there, is going to be shown to be false, demonstrably false.
Thank you. And I'm just wondering, what do you think about the fact that one of the things that the ICJ said in its ruling was that it found that Israel's allegations against UNRWA that it had been complicit in the Hamas-led October 7th massacre that on Israel, that was unsubstantiated. I don't think I'd even known that they had accused UNRWA, a humanitarian body, of taking part in the 7th of October. Had you?
Yeah, well, they were saying that some UNRWA staff were members of Hamas, and I think that's where it came from. But I think the issue is obviously there's lots of people in Gaza who work for the government who are technically working for Hamas. So yeah, I think it's just a bit of a red herring.
Okay, so propaganda, almost in a sense.
Yeah.
So I'll move on to the Ukraine. Today is the 1341st day of the war in Ukraine. The Trump administration has prepared additional sanctions it could use to target key areas of Russia's economy if Vladimir Putin continues to delay ending Moscow's war in Ukraine, according to a report from Reuters. It's not clear whether Washington will actually levy further sanctions, but some of the measures being discussed are reported to include targeting Russia's banking sector and the infrastructure used to get oil to market. Donald Trump imposed sanctions on Russia on Wednesday for the first time since returning to office in January. Yesterday, Trump told reporters aboard Air Force One that he would not schedule any talks with Putin unless it was clear that the Russian leader was serious about making a deal to end the war in Ukraine. Russian missile and drone attacks on Ukraine overnight into Saturday killed at least 4 people and wounded 20, officials said. Ukraine's Air Force said Russia launched 9 missiles and 62 drones, of which 4 missiles and 50 drones were intercepted. In the capital, Kyiv, 2 people were killed and 13 were wounded in a ballistic missile attack in the early hours of Saturday, Kyiv's police said. And in the Dnipropetrovsk region, 2 people were killed and 7 wounded, the acting regional governor said, adding that apartment buildings and private homes were damaged in the strikes. In Russia, the Defence Ministry said its air defences shot down 121 Ukrainian drones over Russia overnight. And yesterday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that Russia's attacks intensified Ukraine's need for Patriot defence systems. It is precisely because of such attacks that we pay special attention to Patriot systems to be able to protect our cities from this horror. It is critical that partners who possess relevant capability implement what we have discussed in recent days, he wrote on X, adding America, Europe and the G7 countries can help ensure that attacks no longer threaten lives. Huge. This wasn't specifically in the update, but Trump seems to continue to vacillate. He's told Zelensky in the White House conversation that which Zelensky described as pointed, and then before you know it, he says that talks with Putin don't go anywhere, and now he's imposed sanctions on Russian oil companies. One minute he's shouting and throwing Zelensky's maps around the Oval Office, and the next he's imposing sanctions on Russia. What do you think the final outcome is going to be? We've lost your sound again. I suppose what I was getting at was these are Trump's own sanctions. This is big news, isn't it? When Trump puts sanctions on Russia's oil industry, um, and surely it can't be easy for him to decide later to vacillate and change his mind and reverse that because he'd be reversing his own sanctions. But I'm not sure you're going to be able to respond. No, wondering what the issue could be just now. And our colleague producing this show, who would be able to perhaps technically be able to help us, is literally on a train travelling from Vienna back here to Scotland after attending an IPI event. And we have some footage coming up later in the show. Huw, are you?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
So
I
your
have
thoughts
no
on?
idea what's going on today. It's just gremlins somewhere.
I wonder if people are able to tolerate the echo, but we'll carry on if you're willing to persevere, Huw.
Yeah.
Trump vacillating. 1 minute he's shouting at Zelensky in the Oval Office, the next he's sanctioning Russian oil.
Yeah, I think we have to remember that Trump is a grade one buffoon. He's no intelligence. He operates like a member of a mob, and everything is around it's transactional around money and deals. He seems to think that he's some fantastic deal maker, and he's somebody who can stop imaginary wars. But yeah, I don't know. It's he's clearly the fact that Putin isn't standing, isn't putting up with his nonsense. It shows you what can be achieved by just ignoring him. Because I think Russia just carrying on. They know that they've got the capacity to carry on fighting for indefinitely, while Ukraine will struggle for beyond another 2 or 3 years. But again, I think the only way we're going to stop Russia is by sanctions, or by basically cutting off their source of money. Because I know that things are quite tough in Russia at the moment. You see pictures of queues to get petrol and diesel. But obviously, they are getting support from North Korea and China. But I think having people like India not taking their oil is going to make a big difference.
Thank you. And when you say people are suffering in Russia, I'm reminded, was it Russian troops that had been captured by Ukraine? When it was time for them to go back to Russia, they didn't want to go because they were better treated by Ukraine. But what about that proposed US-Russia summit in Budapest that was supposed to happen and then got cancelled at the last minute? What was all that about, in your opinion?
I'd imagine Putin didn't want to go, because I think he knows that he's not going to give in to anything. And I think Trump realizes that, even after the Alaska meeting, there was supposed to be, we discussed lots of good things, and, you're going to see big things happening. It was just complete waste of time. And basically, it's pointless negotiating with Putin. And I think even Trump has started to realize that now.
Yeah, I think he did actually say that the talks that he have with him sound good at the time and then nothing happens. But so let's move on to the topic that I think you're probably most interested in this week, which is that there's been a by-election in Caerphilly. In a historic victory this week, Plaid Cymru won the Caerphilly by-election. They defeated the Reform UK, who had been hyped by the media as the most likely to win. Huw, my question to you is a simple one. How do you feel after the win by Plaid in Caerphilly?
On Friday morning or Friday afternoon, hungover was the main feeling. But yeah, no, it was an amazing result, and it was unexpected. I was in Caerphilly on Thursday, and I've been sort of keeping an eye on how things have been going, and I think from a Plaid point of view, the feeling was that Reform were going to win, by a narrow margin. Don't forget, Reform threw everything at this. Farage came down 3 times. they were putting out mail shots in the post, and I think they were fully expecting to win. Nigel Farage, I saw actually Farage on Thursday afternoon with his entourage and security detail, wandering around the town. And apparently he was in Caerphilly until after midnight, because obviously he was waiting for the result to come out for the big victory parade. And but what happened was there was a big turnout, 50%, which is about 10% higher than normal Senedd turnouts. And Plaid Cymru won with a huge margin, 4,000 votes. They polled nearly 50% of the votes, so it was a nice surprise for Plaid. But the analysis after the results has been nothing short of shocking, I think.
Yeah, and I can tell from your posts on BlueSky that you've discerned some interesting trends in how the outcome of the by-election has been reported in the mainstream media. Can you maybe share some of your observations on that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when you look at the discussions around the results, it's all been about Labour's collapse and how Reform were expecting to win and they didn't win. There was a fantastic piece of video from the night that just after the announcement, the Lindsay Whittle, the winning Plaid Cymru candidate, came off the stage, and he was being interviewed by somebody from BBC Wales, and behind them was Huw Powell, the Reform candidate who'd just lost, was surrounded by a throng of journalists, because it was it was being covered. GB News had live coverage of it, because obviously they were thinking it was going to be a huge victory. But the analysis is all around the tactical voting and how Reform can be stopped. There's been very, very little discussion about what Plaid Cymru were offering and the conversations they were having with people in Caerphilly. The turnout was really interesting because it was 50%, it was quite high. A high turnout was thought to have been helpful to Reform. But it appears that Reform voters, even people who had Reform posters outside their houses, they hadn't registered to vote. So I'm hearing about people turning up to vote and asking, I want to vote, and they're saying, well, you're not on the list, you can't vote. So that played into it. But I think the big thing from Plaid's perspective was the youth vote. There was the turnout of young people is notoriously low. In Caerphilly, they contributed, greatly to that extra 10%. And we know that people, 16 to 24-year-olds, you've got 16-year-old can vote in Wales and Scotland. They very much support Plaid Cymru and support independence as well. So you can see the direction of travel there. But it's just disappointing that they didn't discuss Plaid Cymru's progressive platform, and also the reason the real reason why Labour lost. Hewin David, who we lost in very sad circumstances, and I knew Hewin and I'd worked with him in the past. So it was an election that nobody wanted. But it was interesting. West Streeting was on Lorna Coonsberg this morning, and again they were discussing it, and all they were saying was, Labour are low, Reform are way ahead of you. No mention about Plaid Cymru and their policies. And he was saying that it was like a Hartlepool moment. I know that you remember when Labour lost the by-election in Hartlepool to the Conservatives back then. I think it was 2021. Where people who've been voting for Labour traditionally for years have turned their backs on the Labour Party. But West Streeting was saying, well, it shows that we need to change, and we need to change quicker. What they don't realise is the change that Starmer Streeting, Reeves, and all of those have how they've changed the Labour Party is exactly why people in Wales have turned away from them as a party. They've lost those founding principles they used to have. And what people are seeing now is they're seeing Plaid Cymru as a genuine, progressive, socialist option, and people are choosing that. The polls in Wales have been showing for the last months that Plaid Cymru and Reform are neck and neck around 30% each. But what's interesting was the polls in Caerphilly were showing Reform were slightly ahead, I think, on 42%, with Plaid on 38%. And then the reality was Plaid got 48% and Reform got something like 33%. So you can see, it was a big difference. And I think the other thing is, the conversations people are having on the doorstep, the mess that the Reform are making in places like Kent, the fact that they made promises to cut council tax, and the reality is now they're putting those taxes up, higher than other councils, is beginning to cut through. And there was one moment during the campaign. There was a debate on BBC Wales with the 6 candidates, and a mother and her sons were in the audience, and the son, who was mixed race, asked Huw Powell, the Reform candidate, directly, is immigration an issue in Caerphilly, where Caerphilly is 98% of the people there were born in Wales, UK, EU. So it's one of the whitest places you could visit in the United Kingdom. And it's something that struck me when I visited there, is just how few, sort of people from different backgrounds are visible in the community. But the mother then, the lad who spoke incredibly eloquently, and then his mother responded then, who's saying, that she was white, and she was saying that, that the 2% that he was, sort of vilifying was her husband, and that her children had to change the way they behaved, the places where they went, and she directly laid the blame for that at the door of Huw Powell, saying it was the rhetoric that he brought, during their campaign, and he was just left, you could see his soul leaving his body at the end of that. And that clip went viral, had millions of views, beyond, it's gone all around the world. And I think that did have a massive impact, because people do realise that they fought a campaign on immigration, and immigration. And unfortunately, there are people out there who will believe, in something like Caerphilly, where immigration, is demonstrably not the issue. That's not why libraries and museums and social centres are being closed down. It's not the reason why they can't get GP appointments. It's because of underinvestment from Welsh and Westminster governments. So I'm quite hopeful, I think, and over the next few months, that the message that was coming out of Caerphilly will spread further, and we'll see positive response in May next year.
So I'm intrigued about as you say, Plaid won hands down, but Reform did have a huge leap in support, didn't they? They came second. But so where's the swing come from? Historic Labour voted Labour for 100 years in Caerphilly, and what's making people vote for either Reform or Plaid? The people that go to Reform, are they like frustrated unionists?
Yeah, the Conservatives, remember, they lost their deposits. They are on 2%. Their voters collapsed. So basically, most Conservatives have just gone over to Reform, and I think that's where the large part of their support comes from. I think even though these places have been traditionally Labour, they may be Labour, but they weren't naturally socialist. They were always uh, socially conservative. So there has been issues around racism and support for bringing back hanging and things like that in the valleys, and support for the royal family for a number of years. But what Plaid are seeing is obviously they've seen the support grow year on year over the past few years. But what's happening now is that Labour voters, traditional Labour voters with traditional values, socialist values, are moving to Plaid Cymru. So a lot was said, oh, it was a protest vote. Yes, there were some people who voted, who would have probably gone in there and said, right, I just want to keep reform out. But I think we underestimate hugely how unpopular Labour are, and how people feel that Labour have betrayed their roots, and those people are coming over to Plaid, and staying with Plaid. And I think that's where and I think we're seeing what happened in Scotland basically with the SNP. I think in Wales we're about 20 years behind, but but we're getting there slowly.
Well, I think there's a good chance that you might overtake us here in Scotland. You mentioned Scotland and the SNP. There was, and you've talked also about how this has been reported in the mainstream media. There's one example here, it's an interesting one. Paul Hutchin of the Daily Record, who is no fan of the independence movement or the SNP, but he's highlighted the fact that after Plaid have won in Caerphilly, and as Sarwar, as you've said, Labour are disliked in Wales now, and as Sarwar, his fate and whether he becomes First Minister of Scotland or not is going to be strongly intertwined with Starmer's. And if Starmer does well, Sarwar does well. If Starmer does badly, Sarwar does badly. And so it's almost like live by the Starmer, die by the Starmer. Um, but I don't know, that's a mainstream media article which seems to have spoken the truth, no?
Yeah, and I think it's a huge issue. I think it's in Wales. Labour have been in power for 25 years, and people are literally now just saying, we've had enough. A lot of people think that devolution has failed, and it has to a certain extent, but because of Labour's, I wouldn't say incompetence, but they just became. They just thought they were going to win every time. There was no challenge to them. A lot of cronyism. It's just become an unhealthy situation. So there is potential to change things in Wales by having a more radical approach. What was interesting was the morning after the election that Eluned Morgan, the First Minister, being on the phone to Keir Starmer saying, "Oh, we need your help." So lo and behold, when the budget comes out end of next month, don't be surprised that Wales gets extra money because people in Caerphilly voted Plaid Cymru. And it's the same thing in Scotland. Scotland get more than Wales does because they have an SNP government, because Labour are scared of that, and also they get challenged. Whereas we were told that, and I think that's the other thing. We were told with the general election, Labour at both ends of the M4 working together, and everything's going to be great, and it hasn't. Things have actually progressively got worse. So I think people are seeing that as as something that was said at the time, that it was a lie. But I think it is interesting because you look at the general election numbers. It was basically Reform voters taking votes from the Conservatives who handed Labour all those seats, especially in Wales.
Thank you, Sue. And yeah, that Paul Hutchin article, he talks about dread in Scottish Labour, and there must be a shiver running up Sarwar's spine on the morning of the results. Just before we go, the SNP here in Scotland are absolutely over the moon at the result in Caerphilly. Why do you think they would be so happy about it? Why should voters in Scotland care about how an election goes in Wales?
Well, I think Plaid and SNP, obviously closely linked. you know, we always, when there's a conference, there's always a Plaid representative up in the speaking conference, and vice versa, and they work very closely in Westminster. So, politics-wise, they're both very similar parties. They are progressive, and trying to do things for the right reasons. In Scotland, Labour in opposition, they can point to the SNP bad and say all that sort of stuff. In Wales, the fact that they've got a Labour government and it's failing is a really strong point for the SNP. So people saying, "Well, you want change," but why would you want to change from the SNP to Labour when Labour are being decimated in Wales, where they've been in power for 25 years? So yeah, and I think Labour, are in deep trouble. They're not going to ditch Starmer in the next, few months. But I wouldn't be surprised that following the Holyrood and Senate elections, and obviously all those council elections in England, Starmer will likely be toast.
We should move on, but just I can't resist. That same Paul Hutchin article said that for the SNP to do well in Scotland next May, they need a strong turnout from Reform, ironically. But just to end on one positive note for you, Huw, Professor John Curtis said that after the results, it looks like there's a good chance that the next First Minister in the Senate could be Plaid.
Yeah, and in fairness, I think John Curtis has been one of the few voices who actually looked at it, saying that it's not just a protest vote, that people are being attracted to Plaid by their policies, and by the leadership freed up Iorwerth is showing. So I think and he recognised that. I just wish there were more people like John Curtis out there who would be able to discuss that. But Professor Laura McAllister from Cardiff University, she was doing the rounds on the media on Friday, and she was making exactly the same points that she was there pointing out the Plaid Cymru policies, and the people are genuinely enthused by what they're saying. Whereas the London media were just focused on, how can Labour come back, and is tactical voting the way to stop reform?
That's great. Thank you, Huw. Just congratulations just on that result. It's fantastic. But we'd best move on. So the deputy leadership for Labour challenge, the MP for Manchester Central, Lucy Powell, has won the Labour deputy leadership contest. Only last month, Powell was unceremoniously sacked from her cabinet post as leader of the House of Commons, and now she's she's a deputy leader of Labour. A rival and Keir Starmer's favourite to win was Bridget Phillipson, and the challenge came about after the previous post holder Angela Rayner was forced to step down over her tax arrangements. Huw, you mentioned the budget in the previous item, but what do you think Powell's election will mean for the direction of Starmer's Labour government and the upcoming budget on the 25th of November? Apologies.
I think very little. I think obviously Starmer was visibly disappointed. It was clear that he wanted Bridget Phillipson to win, because obviously he wants the blue Labour to have control of the party, and obviously with having somebody you've just sacked back in a position of power and the voice of the membership, even though that membership is dwindling. It's the thing, she's not going to be taking any nonsense. I would imagine there's no love lost between her and Starmer, and she's going to be making things difficult for them. And Starmer just finds it very difficult to deal with that kind of situation. I was reading some analysis, and they were saying, obviously, the fact that they've chosen a deputy leader who is going to be there to represent the members and the backbenchers, that Starmer apparently never speaks to the backbenchers. He's got no sort of line of communication with them. That's all very centralised around a small group, and a group of advisors. And it's just, I think it shows why things are falling apart, because he's obviously, hearing things from people who want to tell him what he wants to hear, whereas the reality out there in the real world is the complete opposite. Because basically, you ask any people from any party, apart from even Reform, the people want to see billionaires taxed more, and they want more money spent on things, on services. Because if one thing comes from the budget, they've just got to look at taxing big business, taxing the billionaires, and putting that money into local authorities so they can actually improve services. Because the way things are going, it's they promised change, nothing's changed, and things actually feel like they're getting worse.
I mean, you say that she's going to cause trouble for Starmer, but she doesn't really have very much power, does she? She's not going to be. She's not going to be a minister in cabinet. And she said in her speech that she wasn't going to cause trouble. Basically, I think that's what she said.
Yeah, but she had to say that. But I would imagine if if there is, when you think about it, you've got a huge parliamentary group of Labour MPs who obviously showed over the welfare votes that they are willing to stand up and vote against things. I think that's the thing that Starmer doesn't realise. He may have his cabinet members and those people around him, but if she is basically that leader of the backbench MPs, and the ears and voice of the membership, then it's going to be very difficult for Starmer. Because Starmer keeps going on, I've changed the Labour Party, and he has, and he's changing and he's changing for the worse. And that's why a lot of people, their own backbenchers, are unhappy, and members are unhappy with the direction of travel. So she's going to be speaking up for those people. Starmer isn't going to be happy about that. So it is. I can always see trouble ahead.
And I mean, you mentioned in the previous item about the big turnout in the by-election in Wales, 50%, which is a lot for a by-election. The turnout for this, for Powell's win, was 16.6%, which is crushingly low compared to the amount of people that voted for Rayner as previous leader. Could Starmer just say, you might be causing trouble or you might want to cause trouble, but you don't have a mandate with only 16% of the membership?
Yeah, well, if 84% of the members didn't want to vote, they basically handed over the responsibilities to those people who were voting. So, I don't think you can use sort of the low numbers for that, but it does show as well how disengaged the members are with the actual party itself.
And what do you think the actual message the membership are trying to get to Starmer? Is it just something like, look, can we please move a little bit more left here? This is what we'd like you to do. Or are they saying that you're on thin ice, you're looking like toast?
Because I think one of the big things about Plaid Cymru, and the reason they won big, was they stood up against reform. They stood up for the nation of sanctuary. They explained what that was for. Plaid Cymru doesn't support mass immigration. Plaid Cymru wants to see controls over of immigration, because you need that to be able to manage any sort of society and economy. But they stood up and said that people all are welcome in Wales, and when people come to Wales, how can we help you to sort of become part of the Welsh community? And people saw that and thought, God, this is refreshing. People are standing up to reforms. Nonsense. Whereas you've got Labour then, who are very sort of trying to appease the reform voters, and by focusing on the stopping the boats, rather than actually talking about the benefits that the immigration brings with it. Because it is, all the studies show that that without immigration we'd be struggling. And going back to Caerphilly again, 98% white British, Welsh. The immigrants who are there, and the immigrants that people come into contact with, are the ones who look after them in the hospital, the ones who deliver their food, and the ones who prepare their food in takeaways. So it's so it's this business of it's a problem. It isn't a problem, and that's the issue. And Reform want to try and make it out that basically that there are millions of people coming in, and that they're all dangerous paedophile rapists. And again, it's awful what has happened in some cases, but we have to remember that the majority of cases of sexual assault are done by white people and by people within their own families. But again, we don't discuss that. We just focus on the odd occasion where somebody's done something terrible. But yeah, it's you just got to put a sense of perspective on things.
Such an odd disconnect, that, isn't it? When there's the colour of the person that committed the crime seems to make such a huge difference. But just quickly about Powell's speech, there were two issues I had with it. The first one is kind of by the by. She said that as a Mancunian, she was proud that the Labour Party had been founded in Manchester. I think Keir Hardie, the Scottish trade unionist, would have a few choice words to say about that, as he founded the Labour Party in Scotland in the 1900s. But the main thing that's current and topical, you said that Labour said that they were going to provide change when they came in, but she never mentioned Brexit.
No, and it's a dirty word for them, isn't it? It was interesting. I think there's been Reeves have been making noises now, actually, for the first time, saying, "Do you know why that things are so terrible? Is because we shot ourselves in both feet by voting Brexit." And again, the people who sold us Brexit, the chances like Farage, they showed everything they said was going to be wonderful has turned out to be the complete opposite. He wrote an article, I think, for something like the National Union of Farmers, saying that food will be cheaper, after. And again, it's just nonsense. Everybody's saying, people saying, "Hang on, no, it's not. Food's going to become more expensive." Oh, and that's Project Fear. And what's transpired? Food is more expensive. And yes, there is inflation globally, but the food inflation here has been far worse because we can't trade with our nearest neighbours. And it was interesting. I was reading about I think it was a Scottish mussel company, or maybe no, actually no, sorry, they were English. They were down in the
Devon or Cornwall,
Cornwall,
yeah.
Devon and Cornwall, who were taking lorries over and had been, obviously lots of paperwork and been a pain, but now they're getting their lorries just stopped and the stuff has to be destroyed. And it shows, that these are the people that Farage was supposed to be standing up for. The fishermen and things like that. And remember, in all there was the time that Farage was in an MEP, I think there was 72 debates on fishing, and he attended none of them.
And I think there's a good chance that Starmer is going to be out of touch, because I've seen polls recently saying that by a big margin, most people agree that Brexit was a mistake, and looks like they'd want it reversed.
If there was a poll tomorrow, then people would vote to rejoin. But it's interesting that Starmer is just as unpopular with people as Farage is. That's the thing. They're both deeply unpopular individuals. And I think again, a lot of the reform stuff is people who just had enough of Labour, Conservatives, two-party politics, whatever. Because I speak to people out on the street, "Oh, I want change," and yeah, and you can understand that, but they don't realise that that the reform aren't offering the change that they want, because they're just not capable of doing it.
And just to end on that, it looks like, looking ahead to the elections in the Senate and Holyrood next year, and Brexit, both Plaid and the SNP are going to be able to take advantage of that, because they want to get back into Europe, don't they?
Yeah, but again, sort of Plaid Cymru and the SNP want to see independent countries within the EU, and that's something that resonates with people, especially younger people. And I think that's the mistake people are making, especially from conservatives are irrelevant now. People have abandoned them and gone to reform. But the younger generation and people who think and worry about things are seeing an alternative, because Labour could win back support by going back to their traditional roots, by getting rid of the two children cap, out taxing billionaires and investing in communities, but they're not. And like I say, just the fact that it's taken until now to admit that Brexit is the reason, because it is something they could be saying. They could be telling people, the economy is stalling. It is sluggish because of Brexit. So, and people would give them more leeway and more forgiveness, but rather than trying to say that that it didn't happen and it hasn't had any impact, and they can grow the economy just by magic. It's crazy. But again, it shows you how poor they are at communicating and judging the mood of the public.
You mentioned the two-child cap. That's another thing that I think Powell didn't mention in her acceptance speech that maybe she should have. But
Yeah, because I listened to the speeches, but it was all very wishy-washy, isn't it? And I think it was, she was basically speaking to the media and trying to sort of show that she was a sensible person. Because I think if she'd have come out sort of fighting straight away ahead of the budget, I think it would have weakened her position. So I think she needs to be playing a longer game.
yeah, okay, fair enough. Yeah, maybe it wasn't the time or the place. So one of the difficulties we've been overcoming here at Broadcasting Scotland is the fact that we're kind of short-staffed, and we've had to call upon our colleague who's travelling. She went to Vienna for the International Press Institute Awards, which took place in Vienna on Friday, and she's making her way back here and is actually the person who's pressing the buttons to change the cameras and the like. So thank you to you. But the International Press Institute Awards, they took place on Friday, and there to witness the award, as I said, for us was our colleague, and we've got some footage from Vienna to prove it.
The challenges are persisting, as you see. Good evening, everyone. I am deeply honored and grateful to stand before you today to accept the prestigious World Press Freedom Hero Award. I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to IMS for this recognition and to the International Selection Committee for considering me.
Good evening. Thank you very much. In the past few days, over 80 people have been arrested in my country, and the number of detained journalists keeps increasing. There are 8 now, and among them a board member of the Georgian Public Broadcaster. She has just been sentenced to 5 days of administrative detention. Just today, this afternoon, they detained 3 journalists. And I fear how these numbers may have changed by the time this remarkable award reaches Georgia. In recent weeks, I've been tasked with a mission to bring some of these awards home. Although this mission fills me with immense pride, it also brings deep sadness. because these awards recognize his courage and sacrifice, but at the same time they remind us of erosion of press freedom and growing injustice in Georgia.
At the end of this year, he will be 78, at which point he would have spent 6 years in maximum security prison in solitary confinement. It's incredibly heartbreaking to say these words, but it's also incredibly inspiring to see this man who, throughout this hard and soul-shaking ordeal, is still standing strong. In one of the occasions in his trial, he was asked about what Apple Daily did, and he said, well, it's very simple, we just hold the torch to the truth. And so I'm sure he would be tremendously honoured to receive this award with all these other people who have decided to hold a torch to the truth and never waver. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. It is an honor also, a deeply sorrow that I'm standing tonight on behalf of Maryam Abudagda, our brave colleague with Independent Arabia from Gaza. Honoring Maryam is really honoring all of us that we try to carry on her legacy and her great job to spread the truth everywhere.
Dear colleagues, it's strange being on stage in Europe accepting the award for a colleague. The colleague who you knew, a prominent journalist, and who is not with us anymore. Victoria was killed in Russian prison, obviously by Russians. Our team at Switzerland 4 have been investigating her murder for months and discovered many details about how exactly everything happened. Horrible details. I will only share one such detail with you. Before her death, Victoria, a young woman, weighed 30 kilos. In just 1 year, in Russian prisons, she lost approximately 15 kilos of body weight. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that a professional journalist from a European country in the 21st century is dying in prison because of torture and starvation?
This award is both a great and a humbling honor, especially to an institution that meant so much to a great journalist, Enrique Sileri, a mentor, a friend, an inspiring boss who was IPI's chairman in the last part of the 1980s. This award makes me also look back with a tinge of wistful nostalgia to my nearly 45 years of journalism and with admiration of the 75th anniversary of the International Press Institute.
Thank you very much for this recognition. It's a great honor, and I am deeply grateful. And yet, I need to acknowledge that the other honorees had to deal with far worse than I ever did. So have far too many journalists around the world. My life has not been in imminent jeopardy. I've never been arrested. I've never been imprisoned. I've not been physically accosted or harassed. I've received many threats, but they were in the form of phone calls, emails, and regular mail. Some, according to the Washington Post security team, came from individuals with violent, even criminal backgrounds. But my colleagues at the Washington Post had to deal with far greater dangers. Of course, we had a president describing journalists as garbage and enemies of the people, and he regularly attacked the Washington Post. He attacked journalists since the day he entered politics in 2015, 3,500 times. Fortunately, during my career, I also had legal protection in the form of the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, with its guarantee of free speech and a free press.
Thank you. I am Martin Caerphilly. I work at TEDx, and I'm speaking on behalf of the entire independent and free media in Hungary. We feel very proud and honored to get this award, so thank you very much.
So I am here, I promise. There you go. Thank you. So Huw, that was quite a somber tone, I thought, to the IPI Awards. We heard from journalists in Georgia, Hong Kong, Gaza, Ukraine, Peru, Hungary, and sadly the USA. And two of this year's awardees were honoured posthumously for the ultimate sacrifice that they made in their work. I mean, maybe sounds like a stupid question, but why are journalists being given international awards when they're in jail? What have they done to deserve being imprisoned? Are they criminals or murderers?
That's the thing, isn't it? It's just speaking the truth and standing up against, corrupt governments and individuals. Some people are paying a very expensive price. We know in the United States now that, they're basically fake news journalists. They don't just give them an opportunity to ask questions, and because they don't want to lose that access, they're just giving, sort of soft soaping Trump. But as you say, how many journalists have been killed in Gaza, and how many journalists are imprisoned in places like North Korea and China for seeking to speak the truth and to inform people, and I think it just goes to show you the importance of good journalism. I think the rise of reform as well. The fact that they just constantly lie and use made up numbers around immigration to try and drive their ambitions to gain power. It's a shocking state of affairs, but it does show why we really need to invest in public interest journalism.
Okay, thank you, Huw. So that is the end of this week's Full Scottish. Apologies before we go for the echoes throughout. Thank you, Huw, for your patience with us, and if you're still with us at home, then thank you for your perseverance too. We appreciate it. But before we go, we just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. We can only exist with your support. Our programmes will always be free to view, but if you can afford £5 a month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. It would make a huge difference to us and help us stay out of this tricky situation we found ourselves in today, technically, or just donate whatever you can afford. But again, thank you to Huw for your incredible stamina and staying with us today. Really appreciate it. And for your insight into... No, thank you. And thank you to you at home for watching. Goodbye.